Hi folks, in this video we continue our discussion of logic and the empirical study of human cognition in cognitive science. What I want you to do is pause your videos and read through this little vignette about Linda, the philosophy major, and then answer the question below, choose A or B. Okay, that was your chance to pause your videos. We're going to talk about the answer now. The correct answer is A, even though about 70% of people choose B. Let me say why A is the right answer. If answer B says that Linda is a bank teller and a feminist, and of course, if somebody is a bank teller and a feminist, they're also a bank teller. So being B also means you are A. But there's also a lot of bank tellers who aren't feminists, or, well, at least there's some bank tellers who aren't feminists, I imagine. And it's possible that there are some. And what that means is the number of people in condition A can't possibly be smaller than the condition B. And it's quite likely that the number of people in B is smaller than in A. So that means that B cannot possibly be more probable. Everybody in B is already in A. So A has to be at least as probable, or given given common knowledge, it's got to be more probable. So A really is the best answer here. Let me say, there's something slightly misleading about the way this question is put. This is one of the classic examples from Kahneman and Tversky that really is what led to Kahneman getting the Nobel Prize for this work. And there's been many iterations of this and refinements of it. And the result really has stood up to the test of time and to replication. You might have read this question by saying, is a bank teller, as implicitly suggesting, like pragmatically suggesting, that is a non-feminist bank teller or something. And so if you read that question that way, that's a fair point. And versions of this have been done in order to study whether or not that makes a difference. Basically, the short story is that there are replicable, robust results of this that really hold up and demonstrate that this is one of the various human biases we have. We are bad, number one, with probabilistic reasoning. And what I think is really illustrative, and why I give you this, is not just because it was a famous example about a philosophy major, which is kind of fun, but because the reason why people are prone to choose B is really enlightening. Basically, B corresponds with a stereotype in our head more about what we have in that vignette. So when we read the story about Linda, that conjures up a kind of image of her. And that image fits the feminist bank teller, it's more representative or resembles B more than it just resembles being a random bank teller, A. And so that tendency of us to make judgments based on representativeness and relationship to common stereotypes is what oftentimes is a hallmark of system one processing. Because system one processing is basically our lazy system. It's the type of a processing system our brains use when we have to make snap judgments very fast, which is oftentimes when we are prone to biases and relying on stereotypes, rather than carefully thinking through, which is cognitively expensive. It takes a lot of energy. Your brain, if you don't know this, is like the most resource intensive, the biggest energy hog in your entire body. And so if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, it's incredibly poorly adapted for us to have to use that cognitively intensive system too all of the time. In order to survive, we had to be able to make snap judgments with low resource intensivity for most of our lives. So this system makes sense. In a sense, we use this most of the time, and then this comes on board whenever we really need to make important decisions. The trouble is, we don't realize this. Most people don't realize this distinction, and they make all sorts of important decisions based on things like representativeness or stereotypes, especially when they're under time pressure. So the ability to exploit system one and type one biases is really a big part of the empirical study, or it's a fact uncovered by the empirical study of cognition in cognitive science. Let me give you one tiny final example. Those ones we've been looking at are sort of logical inferences about stories, but this applies to all sorts of information your brain processes. For example, take a look at this real quick. Okay, now I'm going to flash it away. Ignore the little click to add things. In that little image I just flashed to you, what color was the dot that was different than all the other dots? Of course, you should say red. Your brain was able to do that for you. You didn't have to slowly, one by one, look at all the dots and form an image of it. Your visual processing system can take in huge amounts of information at one time, and your brain can make all sorts of inferences and combine bits of that information in incredibly complex ways, which requires very little resources, and it doesn't require any sort of top-down executive functioning from you. So that is a perfect example of what system one or type one kind of processing is like. It's very least resource non-intensive. It does not take many resources in order to do that. And so it's very helpful, obviously, for us to have that sort of thing. Let me say how this relates to the brain science as well. There are different parts of your brain that are more or less active in different types of processing. So it's just a fact that the cortex and the front lobes of our brain, a lot of this stuff has to do with advanced logical inferences, and it takes a lot of energy in order for us to use those parts of our brains. So those are more correlated with type 2 processing. And then there's other parts like our reptilian brain, our emotional system, or amygdala, that is much more prone to type 1 reasoning and type 1 processing. But again, that's not the same thing as saying you've got a little logic part processor of your brain and that's where all the inferences are done. In fact, one of the cool results about studying real empirical human logical inferences is that that simplistic picture is not the case. You don't just have some tiny little central processing unit in your brain that does all of the logic. It's diffused throughout these regions, and that makes it really complex and fun to investigate. And the stuff that we talked about in the previous video is just how our system one makes us prone to certain types of biases, like anchoring, or certain types of errors, like maybe the probabilistic error about the Linda inference. But there's also a clue here to what kind of progress we can make. So sometimes people have this attitude in a logic class where we just teach you logic and then we assume that you're going to become better reasoners because now you've done a semester or a quarter of formal logic. And I want to tell you that is not true. You don't automatically, just by learning more logic and what logical validity is and being able to do some formal proofs, that does not automatically make you a better reasoner in your everyday lives and less prone to biases. I mean, that would be wonderful if it were just that easy, but it's not. And I'm not going to tell you that it's just that easy. So understanding this distinction, though, helps you see what kind of work you do need to do if you want to get better. The thing about recognizing two different systems is you can see what kind of work you have to do. System one, you can make improvements to system one reasoning, but it is incredibly difficult. These inferences are fast and easy, but that means moving this thing, it's like moving a tanker ship or something. It takes an immense amount of energy. But once you make these improvements, you're sort of set on a better course and you're going to be much better off because of it. In fact, what it tends to take is this thing about habits. We have to invest a lot of energy into developing better cognitive habits, and in order to not be so easily exploited. One of those, let me just give you one example. System 2 processing improvement is much easier. Like, think about how much improvement you made in system 2 processing in this course by your ability to do calculations and formal proofs. When I gave you a difficult formal proof, if I would have given you one at the beginning of the quarter, you simply couldn't do it. But now you can actually grind through some complex formal proof with 30 steps. You've done immense improvement in your system 2 processing with logic in this class. But my point is that does not necessarily make you a better system 1 reasoner in your everyday lives. So my main tip, my main recommendation for you is, if you want to be less prone to biases, it's not easy to do, but here's one way you can try to make progress. Understand that a lot of times our biases come from reliance on system 1 responses when we are in high-risk situations, when we are likely to make stereotypical judgments that are deeply problematic. Let me give you one example of this. I mean, hopefully you can tell, thinking about all of the turmoil in our country today, that this is incredibly important information and important to invest effort and valuable to think about. Let me give you one non-politicized example. I don't know if you've ever bought a car, but car salesmen and women, whether new cars or used cars, are amazingly good at exploiting your cognitive biases and your errors in reasoning. Basically, what happens when you go in to buy a car? I suggest you do it just for the practice, so you can see people try to manipulate you, and then you can start to become on guard against this. Buying a car is basically one of these high-risk situations. Anytime when you are trying to make an important decision, because a car is a lot of money, then you don't want to make a poor judgment. That could cost you thousands of dollars if you make a poor judgment. You could be regretting it for a long time. And so when you're in a situation where it matters more, then you need to make sure you have enough time to make decisions that you're not being emotionally pressured or rushed. So we are prone to making errors and biases when we are short on time. Just think how much harder a logic test is if I give you not enough time to do it in. So your brain will just rely on stereotypes and representativeness and be prone to exploitation if you have very little time. And time pressure tactics are precisely one of those things in the toolkit of car salespeople. So don't let yourself be forced into a decision and pressured into a decision. Or if you know you're going to be under time pressure, make sure you have as much information as you can before you get yourself in that situation. So understanding when we are more prone to difficult decisions and more prone to reliance on biased responses can be a first step in order to make fewer biased responses, in order to actually become better reasoners in our everyday lives. If you're more curious about this, I recommend checking out Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So dwell on all of that, put all of that information together, and I'm going to give you one final problem to work on. Okay, are you ready? You get as much time as you want on this. Pause your videos and take your time and try to come up with the right answer. Okay, that was your chance to pause your videos. What I want to know is, did you pause your videos? I imagine most of you thought that $1 was sort of the immediate first thought that most people have for the cost. No, excuse me, it's not $1 that's the common response. The back cost $1. Oh, so 10 cents. This is the one I meant to cross out. 10 cents is the most common response because people think there's a dollar difference between them. So if this is, I'll just sort of subtract $1 from that and I'll get 10 cents. But that is actually not the correct answer. The correct answer is 5 cents. So what I'm hoping that you thought about is, my brain immediately suggests this answer as a first possibility. But did you take the time to actually pause your videos and think about it? Because I'm convinced you have the mathematical ability to compute that 5 cents is actually the correct answer. Because if this one is 5 cents and there's a dollar difference, then the other one is $1.05, and that adds up to $1.10. But did you take the time? Did you bother to figure it out? Did you recognize that this was possibly a tricky question? If you did all of those things, then you're on the road to recognizing and avoiding cognitive errors because you're falling into biased responses. And that is the thing that I want to leave you with. If you want to actually improve your everyday reasoning, recognize when you might be relying on problematic inferences and shortcuts, and take the time to slow down and see if you can do better. Okay, thanks.